Hello, fellow horror cats. Meow. Today I have my good friend Mr. Iced Latte next to me to get me through this video because I already know it's gonna be a long one. Oh, with the oat milk, it's just, oh. I'm actually doing this video today because it came highly requested by you guys, so make sure that your voice is heard whenever I post a poll on my community tab or on my Instagram, because initially I wasn't super interested in doing this video, but there was a very high demand. But also because this is a tough one to skip, one can't really deny the impact that Carrie had on the horror genre, so really how could I dare not make this video? If you're new here, you might be curious about how I structure my videos, so let me just break it down. Imagine that I just got up and started breakdancing. No. So first we'll go over the historical significance, the cultural significance of each of the movies, and I'll break down a lot of the behind the scenes information. Then we'll compare the plots of each of the movies, mostly just focusing on the most iconic scenes. After that will be the character comparison, so we'll compare our bullies, our gym teachers, our Margaret Whites, our Carrie Whites. Then we'll have a brief section on the styles of each of the movies, so we'll break down some of the cinematography, the production design, stuff like that. Just the overall vibes. And finally, we'll break down the themes of each of the movies. What were the moral lessons? What were we supposed to learn from each of these films? And you already know in the end, of course, we'll do one general overall comparison and we'll try to decide which is the superior film. Although today will be a little bit more of a ranking because we have 3 movies. So let's start with the one that began it all, Carrie from 1976. For my research on this movie, there are actually 2 documentaries that I watched that you can find here on YouTube. One is called The Making of Carrie 1976, and then the other one is called Acting Carrie, which is a 2001 documentary. So Carrie from 1976, it had a budget of $1.8 million and went on to gross $33.8 million in the box office. Hopefully, as everybody knows, it was adapted from the famous Stephen King novel that was published in 1974. While he was speaking at a book convention, Stephen King admitted that he was only paid $2,500 for the rights to adapt his book. Even though that's a painfully low amount of money when you take into account the production costs of the movie, he has no regrets about it. He says that he just feels grateful that this happened to his first ever published book. And then the success of Carrie is really what cemented Stephen King as a famous author. He also was really delighted with the adaptation. But because he was such a newcomer at the time of this film's release, they even spelled his name wrong in one of the trailers. They spelled it Stephen with a V and not a PH. And Sissy Spacek, who played Carrie in the movie, went on to record the audiobook version of the novel. But now to get a bit more into the pre-production of the movie, Brian De Palma is the one who initiated the making of this movie. Apparently he read the book and then immediately called his agent. Oh my god, I just realized I'm not wearing any of my jewelry. Oh, this is wrong. This is wrong. 1 second. Oh, okay. That was a close one. I don't know what it is, but you get used to wearing jewelry, and then when you don't wear it, especially rings, you just feel naked. I knew something was off. I was like, something is not right here, but I couldn't figure out what it was. I think the vibes are all in check now. Let's continue. There's also a lot of interesting information on how the actors were cast in this movie. For example, this was John Travolta's first major film role. Also, one of the best stories that I learned about their casting process is the fact that Brian De Palma and George Lucas were sharing a casting session. De Palma was looking for people for Carrie, and George Lucas was looking for people, of course, for Star Wars. So William Katt, who ended up getting the role of Tommy Ross, came in initially to audition for Luke Skywalker. At the time, Amy Irving had been doing Romeo and Juliet on stage. This was her first ever on-screen role. PJ Soles had never even been to LA before. She had flown out to do some auditions. Nancy Allen had only ever been doing commercials in New York. And then Piper Laurie had apparently been retired for about 15 years, and she didn't even have an acting agent anymore. And there were a lot of factors that almost stopped her from getting the role, because initially the first time she read it, she did not like the part. And then the second time she read it, she was like, oh, I was reading it incorrectly the first time. So when she went into her audition, she went in thinking that it was a satire. Also, our famous and lovely Sissy Spacek was not originally the first choice for Carrie. Brian De Palma's heart was set on somebody else at first, but then once he saw Carrie's audition, you know, obviously she blew everybody away. Now let's get into some of the background info on the first remake, Carrie from 2002. One thing to note right off the bat is that I had no idea this movie existed up until about 2 weeks ago. It was made for TV, but it was written and produced by Brad Fuller, which if you don't know who he is, he also was a major producer on like every early 2000s slasher remake. He produced like all of the Purge movies, Ouija Origin of Evil. So there was actually a pretty big name on this project, and it was originally intended to kick off the beginning of a TV series. The premise of the TV show was was supposed to be that Carrie White would move to Florida to help other telekinetically gifted young people. But due to unsurprisingly terrible ratings, this didn't end up happening. I also don't have box office information for obvious reasons, but it is said that roughly 12.2 million people did watch the movie when it was first released to TV, and it was very poorly received by critics. It earned a 20% on Rotten Tomatoes. I do have to say this movie has kind of a stacked list of like C-list-ish actors, although I guess I would say Catherine Isabel is maybe rocking like a B-list status. She's from Ginger Snaps, and then what else is she in? She's also in American Mary, and of course Freddy vs. Jason. And then you have the actresses Rena Sofer and Emily D. Raven, who both have roles in the show called Once Upon a Time. I used to really like that show. I think it's still on Netflix. I loved the first 3-ish seasons, and then it got weird. It got quite bad. But anyways, onwards with my background information. This is the only adaptation of Carrie that is structured pretty similarly to the book, where you have interviews of a lot of the victims of prom night that are kind of interwoven with the story. Brian Fuller was also asked to add some more positive dialogue about religion so that the film wouldn't come across as completely anti-religion. So an example of this is when Carrie would be contrasting her mother's opinions about faith with her own. This movie is also the only version of the story to depict the scene where a younger Carrie goes up to her neighbor when she's sunbathing in her backyard. She sees that her neighbor's breasts are exposed, she calls them her dirty pillows, and then her mother drags her back inside, and then pebbles rain down from the sky. And dear God, just the special effects of this scene. I mean, woof. Interestingly enough though, this scene was filmed for both the original film and the 2013 remake, but the scene didn't make it into either film. Angela Bettis, who plays Carrie, was also quoted saying, "If I weren't in it, I wouldn't have watched it. I would have been one of those people that was like, down with the Carrie remake." She's also the oldest actress to ever play Carrie. She was 28 at the time of filming. Sissy Spacek was 26, and Chloe Grace Moretz was the youngest at 15 years old. And now for the background info of the remake. Wait. Didn't I already read that line? Oh yeah, there are 2 remakes for the original Carrie. So Carrie from 2013, I couldn't really find a definitive reason as to why this movie was being remade again, but from the interviews that I watched, it seemed like Kimberly Pierce was the one to initiate it. She had always loved the book while growing up. If you don't recognize her, she's also responsible for directing the movie Boys Don't Cry, as well as the movie Stop Loss, which to be honest, I haven't seen Stop Loss. If you haven't seen Boys Don't Cry, it's a really tough watch, but it is the film debut of Hilary Swank. So anywho, let's get into some background information. It had a budget of about $30 million and went on to gross $84.8 million. We have some big name stars in this movie as well. We have Judy Greer as the gym teacher. We have Julianne Moore, who's playing Margaret White, and then of course Chloe Grace Moretz, who is playing Carrie. Stephen King was already pretty unenthusiastic about another adaptation of the novel. He thought it was unnecessary because the original was already a great film. And then when he finally watched the movie, he of course was not fond of it. And during pre-production, they did communicate with Stephen King, but then he was not an active consultant on the film. Although, he did suggest somebody for the role of Carrie White, and I feel like you'd never guess who, so I'm gonna tell ya. He recommended Lindsay Lohan because he thought that she looked similar to Sissy Spacek. Another person that showed interest in the role of Carrie White that I cannot fathom is Megan Fox. Mainly because even when you try to make her look tired or less beautiful, you can't do it. I mean, have you seen Jennifer's Body? When she walks around looking tired, she still looks just absolutely breathtaking. The role of Carrie was also almost given to Haley Bennett, who, if you don't recognize her, she is from the movie Swallow. And if you're a true fan of early 2000s cheesy mess, you also would recognize her from The Haunting of Molly Hartley. And I think she would have been a way better fit for the role. But alas, something that I thought was funny is that Sissy Spacek was considered for the role of Margaret White in this movie. I think that would have just ended up being really funny. I think she could have done it. I think she could easily do the role. But imagine any fan of the original, or anybody that's just simply seen the original, is now watching this remake. They wouldn't be able to get it out of their heads that, you know, she's Carrie. Like, Sissy Spacek is Carrie. This was also the film debut for Ansel Elgort. For the film's viral marketing campaign, there was a phone number that was created that fans could call, and it kind of acted as like a teaser for the film. You dial the number, and apparently there is a recording of Carrie and Margaret White, and I thought that it would be fun if we dialed this number together and I would react to it. 855-522-7713.
Sorry, the toll-free number you have dialed is unassigned.
Oh, well, alright then. I feel like kids who are horror fans don't get cool stuff like that anymore. Like, remember how with the Blair Witch Project, they literally made MySpace pages for the actors and their last active date was the date that they went missing? Like in the movie, you know? I wish they would still do stuff like that. Anyway, in terms of other behind the scenes content, there really isn't that much. There are tiny 2 to 4 minute little featurettes of the actors being interviewed and such, but beyond that, there isn't really much behind the scenes. I mean, there is actually quite a bit of footage that is from behind the scenes, but it was never made into a behind the scenes documentary or anything like that. You can just go and watch it on YouTube. There's no music, no interviews. It's just a bunch of behind the scenes footage just cut together. That's all it is. So now we're gonna move on to the plot comparison. Carrie follows a high school aged Carrie struggling to fit in due to her oppressive, religious, and antisocial upbringing. When bullying goes too far, a remorseful student asks her boyfriend to take Carrie to the senior prom. Hopefully you're decently familiar with the classic story. We are going to be getting into a lot of spoilers today, but I'm mainly going to be talking about the shower scenes, the prom scenes, and the endings of each of the 3 movies. And I'll make note of any other important difference as I see fit. Right off the bat, I'm not a super big fan of the original Carrie, let's just get that out of the way. It opens in a girl's locker room in a high school, and a bunch of the women are naked, which like I obviously can't show. But yes, it's apparently integral to the story. We must show underage boobs and sexualize them. Well, the actresses were actually in their mid-20s, so it's fine if they were nude. Do you want me to suspend my disbelief? Like, do you want me to believe that these events are happening to real underage high school girls? Then don't sexualize them. So as I watched it, I was like, this is so male gaze heavy for what exactly? Because this is a woman's story, is it not? It's a coming of age story about a teenage girl, but like, of course it's written by a man, of course it's directed by a man, so of course it's shot through the male gaze. You know, why would it be shown through a woman's perspective, you know? That would be silly. Upon further research, I did discover Brian De Palma's actual intention with that scene. They wanted to use the nudity to put the audience on edge because it was only the second scene of a film. I guess back then they would save a nude scene for like the middle to end of the movie or something because it had a lot of shock value. So when he said that, I was like, oh yeah, okay, so yeah, it is quite shocking that we're like looking at a bunch of naked teenage girls. But then he said that he did want the scene to be perceived as very sensual so that he could flip it on its head when you realize it's actually a very frightening moment, like when she starts to bleed. So, okay. I would have been just as alarmed by her getting her period if the scene hadn't started out sensually. And it's also worth noting that pretty much all of the actresses were really uncomfortable doing the nudity. And then De Palma went on to say that the girls that ended up actually going through with the nude scene were troopers. I don't like that language. No, I don't like that narrative. I think it would be different if he was like, yeah, I respect the choices of these women that back down. It's totally fine. But for the women that did do it, I think it enhanced my scene and I'm really glad that they did. But instead he's calling them troopers and I'm like, okay, well, what does that make the women that didn't get naked for you? Like, are they less deserving of your respect? Please clarify. He admitted in his interview that the girls were so uncomfortable to the point that a lot of them backed down. A lot of them were uncomfortable and anxious to the point of tears. So like, what kind of energy were you coming at them with? What kind of expectations were laid down that they felt that anxious to the point of tears? I know that at the time it was probably considered a way more racy thing to do. Honestly, there still is a stigma around it, but that's a whole other thing that I just don't want to unpack today. But let's just say I'm sure that people looked at these women with a lot more critical eye than they did Arnold Schwarzenegger when he was just swinging his schlong down the street in Terminator. So I do recognize that as a factor. But even so, with how they were driven to be that uncomfortable to the point of anxiety and tears, I feel like that says a lot more about Brian De Palma than it does about those women. And it turns out he had some other unsavory expectations as well. He had Betty Buckley really slap Nancy Allen in that scene, and because she couldn't get the reaction that Brian De Palma wanted, she was slapped over 30 times. Your favorite director is a fucking weirdo, and that's not my fault, okay? Get better, idols. Although it is very worth noting that the actresses who ended up doing the nudity thought that the scene was beautiful.
I thought it was very beautiful, so I couldn't really be too upset about it.
So I'm really about that, like, all power to them. I'm so glad that they feel empowered by the scene because that could have easily gone the other way. And I guess I do have to give it to De Palma that it is an unsettling scene, even if maybe not necessarily in the way that he intended. Then of course we must discuss the prom scene, probably the reason why this movie became so iconic. Then I'll discuss a few of the elements of the ending of the movie because all 3 movies took a little bit of a different approach with the ending of the movie and they're all different to the book. But But some fun facts for you first. The name of the school in this movie is named after Norman Bates. It's called Bates High School. There was also no ceiling in the gym because it was a soundstage. It wasn't a real gym. So to distract the audience from the fact that there was no ceiling, they made it pitch black and then they hung all of the wonderful stars and the banners. And the art director thinks that this did set a trend for real proms in America. Also, for the spinning shot where you have Tommy and Carrie dancing together, that really pretty shot, they put the actors onto a turntable. So then while they're spinning on the turntable, they're also going around them in the crowd with the camera. There's also one shot in the prom scene that took them an entire day to film, and De Palma calls it his figure 8 shot. And the studio was so angry about the fact that he took an entire day on one shot that he was almost fired. It's the one that starts at the table on the ballots, and then it follows PJ Soul's character with the ballots, and then she drops those, she picks up the fake ones, and then we see Chris and her boyfriend, they're peeking out from under the stage, and then we follow the rope all the way up to the blood, and then it zooms in on the table, which is where the shot began. Super, super impressive filmmaking. And sorry, I probably had to speed that shot up quite a bit because it's a very, very long shot. But the one thing that I kind of hate about the scene is when it goes split screen when Carrie starts to rage. And this also apparently gave them a lot of issues in the editing room because De Palma had decided to shoot the whole thing in split screen. And imagine that it's 1975 or whenever they were shooting this. And if you wanted to have a split screen moment in your movie, you had to shoot it in a split screen and then there was nothing you could do about it after the fact. Because if I want to do a split screen, I can just kind of like, simple as that. Also, the blood that was poured on Sissy was a special type of syrup that was warmed up. So she said it was pretty pleasant when it did fall on her because it was nice and warm, but then when it started to dry, it got extremely sticky, so somebody had to follow her around with a spray water bottle. If I was a PA on that movie, I would 100% volunteer to be the water spritzer. Also, there was an injury during the production of this movie because when the water shot PJ Souls in the ear, it immediately broke her eardrum. Ouchie! Sorry, I know this doesn't really have to do with the plot, but I really appreciated a lot of the behind the scenes information about this scene. After the prom scene, of course, you have the moment where Chris and her boyfriend receive their karma. Oh my god, that was a play on words. I didn't even mean to do that. Karma. And the way that they did this practical car flip was pretty cool. They actually built a cannon under the car, which is how they made it flip. I love a good practical car crash. And then let's talk about one of the biggest changes that they made from novel to screen, and that would be Carrie's mother's death. In the book, Carrie stops her mother's heart a little bit at a time, which works perfectly fine for a novel, but it's not a very cinematic experience. So with all of the knives and such being flown into her mother's body, this was a much more visual experience. And then the actual ending of the movie, because this movie has like 3 different endings, it's also much different to the book because in the book it apparently ends with some little girl in another distant city who starts to move marbles with her mind, so it's kind of leaving the impression that another Carrie is starting to be born. Stephen King apparently loves the ending of the movie much more than the ending of his own book. That would be where Sue goes to Carrie's grave in a dream and then Carrie's hand comes up to grab her. Fun fact, this scene was actually shot in reverse, so she is walking forward and cars behind her are driving backwards. To be honest, my thoughts on this, I was just like wildly confused. It was a super weird ending and I feel like it left me confused for the wrong reasons. I think it's just one of those things that was meant to be shocking and back then it was, but I don't know if it's just like it hasn't aged the best or maybe it's just been done a lot since then. Because when I look back on it and I watch the movie as a modern audience member, it comes across as really satirical. And I've kind of already mentioned this, but I'm just kind of giving my overall review thoughts on the movie now. Honestly, I didn't really like it. I gave it 1.5 stars on Letterboxd because honestly the movie kind of bores me. I don't like that it's a woman's story that's so obviously told through a man's lens, and some of the subject matter just isn't explored to the depth that it should be. It's not all bad though, but I'll get into more of my positive thoughts when I do my overall comparison. So now let's get into the plot of Carrie from 2002. Before we get into the shower scene of this remake, I just really need to level with you. I gotta be honest here. I feel like this is a safe space. I didn't really watch this movie. It's actually really sad growing up and realizing just how bad TV movies are. And it's not just that it's bad, it's that it's so unbelievably bad that nothing in me could justify sitting through its 133 minutes of runtime. 133 minutes of pure steaming sewage. So what I decided to do is to watch about the first half hour of the movie. I saw the shower scene, some other important recreated scenes, and then I skipped skipped ahead to the prom scene, and then I skipped ahead some more to the end of the prom scene because come here. I want you to hear this from my lips. The prom scene is over a half hour long. I kid you not, from the time that she rolls up to the prom to the time that she walks out of the doors covered in blood, it goes from an hour and 19 minutes to an hour and 52 minutes. Too long! So I just kind of skimmed through and I caught the gist. They really had to pad this movie out too because initially it was too short of a runtime to air on TV. So this scene is just painfully dragged on. For example, they tease you and you see the blood and she's about to pull the rope and then they go out and dance. There's a dancing montage first, but psych, it was all in Carrie's head. And then the scene continues and then finally she gets the blood dumped on her. But it's very, very bad. You don't really need more specifics than that, just trust me. A criticism that this adaptation often gets is that Carrie goes into shock when the blood is dumped on her. But not only that, she just zones out and her power completely takes her over. It's like she's possessed. The problem with that is that it takes out any of the conscious moral choice that Carrie would have, and it just makes her a victim to this dark force. It's such a common criticism because Stephen King really likes to put in moral dilemmas into his stories, and by having Carrie basically get possessed, it just removes that. Where this movie is pretty different to the original is in its ending. Worth noting, I guess, is that instead of her mother trying to stab her, she tries to drown her. And then instead of perishing with her mother, she is saved by Sue, and then they drive off, and the ending of the movie is kind of a cliffhanger because it's setting up Carrie going to help other telekinetically gifted students. They still do a play on the dream thing, but it's one of those stupid things where Carrie is dreaming, then she wakes up, and then that was a dream within a dream. Literally just padding out the runtime just for shock value, whatever. So now let's get into the 2013 plot. There's a common complaint about this movie that I feel like is earned because a lot about this movie is very, very similar to the 1976 adaptation. There still are quite a few very notable differences though, so we're gonna get into that. One very positive difference is the opening scene, so let's jump into that. We open with girls playing volleyball in the pool, which is a very obvious homage while changing it up a little bit. But my favorite difference is the shower scene. First of all, there's no emphasis on sexualizing the minors. We love to see that. But the most important change to the shower scene, I think, is that initially a girl was just genuinely trying to give her a tampon, but then because Carrie wouldn't calm down, the energy of the room just kept escalating until then a girl decided to film her. Which I think that's interesting, them whipping out a cell phone and filming her, because it definitely modernize the story a bit, but it also stays very true to the source material. Now, of course, onto the prom scene. How does it compare? It's too similar in many ways. The one way that it's different is how much CGI is used when Carrie loses her shit. And there are some other stylistic choices that are super weird. For example, when the blood falls on her, you see it from like 4 different angles over and over, and it's really weird and it reminds me like, oh yeah, this isn't real, I'm just watching a very gimmicky movie. I also don't like the way that Chloe Grace Moretz moves and her mouth is always open, but there are some things that I actually like about it. I enjoy that you see the scene from her POV very explicitly. I also like that there's more of an emphasis on Tommy's death. She actually gets down on her knees and she sees that he's dead, and we see more of a reaction from her, because in the original you don't actually understand that he dies, you only understand that later in dialogue. I think that it makes her tipping point even more earned because suddenly the only student in this school that's ever shown her any kindness is now dead. I also like that she gets blood in her eye. I like that a lot of the deaths are a lot more up close and personal. Moretz also insisted that she not know when they were going to dump the blood on her so that her reaction would be genuine. There's also one detail of the prom scene that happens in the book that's not present in any of the adaptations. In the book, Carrie actually stumbles off stage and she flees outside and she starts to destroy the prom and everybody from outside looking in through a window. But in every single adaptation, she starts her destruction from the stage, which I think is a good choice. Now for the actual ending of the movie, which disappointed on several levels. When she kills her mother, again, she impales her with everything just like in the original movie, but this time it's all with CGI and it's like Matrix-y. But not only that, in the end, Sue also comes to try to talk to Carrie, and then Carrie tells Sue, "It's a girl." And then the final scene is Sue giving birth to Carrie's hand, which psych, because then she wakes up super pregnant from that dream just screaming. A really weird twist to put on the ending, that's for sure. If I had to choose which ending would be the best, I think it would definitely be the original. Even though I find it to be goofy, I do think that it is the least stupid of all of them. Now we're on to one of my favorite parts, that would be the character comparison. We're not going to concern ourselves with the characters from Carrie 2002 until we get to Margaret and Carrie 1. White, because to be real, it's just really not that relevant. So we'll start with Chris. In the original, she's a great villain, honestly, no notes. Her character is really understated. We see how she really feels about herself when she's in the car with her boyfriend and he abuses her, but she still tries to please him. So she's exerting whatever power she has in her life to take it out on Carrie, because she's being abused by her boyfriend, and in her eyes, the gym teacher is also abusing her. In the 2013 remake, they do it in a different way, where you see her interactions with her teachers and with her father, and it's her sense of entitlement that's driving her. Somebody also wrote this down on IMDb. They said that in this adaptation, Chris Hargensen is intentionally made up to look over-tanned with too much makeup and ratty hair extensions, and this was done to suggest that she might be subconsciously or secretly jealous of Carrie's more natural beauty. I get that, nice attention to detail, but sometimes girls just like wearing a lot of makeup. Sometimes I like wearing a lot of makeup. It's a fun way to express yourself. But anyway, moving on to the gym teacher, whose name I can never remember, and you'd think I would have written it down, wouldn't ya? Nope. I don't think this is a major comparison to make, but I do have to say I think I prefer Judy Greer. She's my girl sometimes. Not always, but sometimes. Then we have Sue, who is just a mostly pretty flat character. I'm not really gonna get into her. So let's talk about Tommy Ross. In the original, he's played by Bill Catt. He's a very lovely man, by the way, very forgiving also of young PAs who may or may not have accidentally walked into his trailer one time without knocking because their fellow PA put his name tag on the wrong door, and you thought nobody was in there, so when it happened you got really scared and you were like, oh my god, I'm so sorry, I would have knocked if I had known somebody was in here, and he was like, oh my god, please, no worries, don't worry about it at all. Don't ask me how I know that. In the remake, he's played by Ansel Elgort, and I do not like Ansel Elgort. He gives me major creep vibes. His nice guy act doesn't work for me in any movie that he's in, not in this one, not in Divergent, not in The Fault in Our Stars.
Okay, bro. My spidey senses were tingling for a reason. He literally fat shamed Chloe Grace Moretz, and she never said explicitly who it was, but she was like, then I had to go and act like he was my love interest. So, bitch, it was Ansel Elgort. And I also found this, which I don't really know how to check the credibility of the source, but like, believe women, you know? The moral of the story is trust your spidey senses.
So I obviously prefer William Catt, and no, it has nothing to do with the fact that he was so nice to my 19-year-old dumbass. All jokes aside, I think his character actually just felt a lot more genuine and was hella likable. Now let's move on to the iconic Margaret White. In the original, she's played by the wonderful Piper Laurie, and her performance kind of speaks for itself. No, I don't think I have anything to add to the conversation there, so I'll just let her Oscar nomination do the talking. Let's just briefly talk about Margaret White from Carrie 2002, because literally the only thing I want to point out is that she's played by Tammy #1 from Parks and Rec. I think that that's crucial knowledge that I've now imparted on you, so you're welcome. And she embodies the exact same energy in both roles, actually. It's kind of weird. Then in the 2013 remake, she is played by the very talented Julianne Moore. And look, what am I gonna do? Sit here and tell you how wildly talented Julianne Moore is? No, because you know that. But that being said, I don't feel like she really added too much to the role. And maybe that's not really her fault because this remake was so derivative of the original movie. Maybe she just didn't really have much wiggle room. I don't know. But anyways, the most interesting character comparison would be Miss Carrie White. Now, Sissy Spacek. I'm not a huge fan of the original movie, but I love this woman. She's like this beautiful alien creature who really feels like she is surrounded by humans for the first time. She has this air of a true fascination to her. And when she loses it at the prom, it's so believable that her rage is so explosive that it's implosive. Have you ever been so shocked and so mad that all you can do is basically just tense your whole body up and just sit there still for fear of all of your emotions exploding out of you? Honestly, I myself have not been that mad since puberty, hence why it's also perfect that this story is set in high school. But Sissy embodies that inner rage so perfectly because everything that's happening around her shows you exactly what's happening in her head. Interestingly enough, I think that her awkward, brooding energy was recaptured in Carrie 2002. She had the same exact creature from another world reacting to humans kind of energy about her. And that's probably literally the only praise that I can give that god-awful movie. And then in the 2013 remake, woof. This is a very popular opinion in the horror community, but Chloe Grace Moretz as Carrie, she does not have it. She was giving me Bella Swan vibes, and I literally lost track of how many times I thought that I was watching Twilight. She's just like, I'm just like new here and I don't know what's going on. I guess I'm just a little bit different to the other girls. It's rough. It really is. And you know, this should be considered a compliment because I think she's just too cool to play this role. Her off-screen personality is so laid back and outgoing that I think she just literally doesn't have it in her to have that kind of awkward introvert energy. And God bless, I wish I was never cool enough to understand what that must be like. Anyway, the reason why the prom scene doesn't really work for me as much in the remake too is because her rage is super over the top. Her emotions lack any kind of nuance. It's literally just rage, fucking rage. None of that alien quality that Sissy Spacek was serving. On that note of the prom scene, let's switch gears and talk about the styles of each of these movies. The original had very subtly fantastic cinematography, except for the simulated split screen kind of moments. Those were very dramatic. But for the most part, you don't really even notice the cinematography, but in a good way. It wasn't until I saw the behind the scenes and I saw that it took an entire day to accomplish that figure 8 shot that I was like, oh damn, hold on. Same with when I found out that they put the actors on that spinning turntable thing, I was like, well, I will be damned. And of course, everything is practical. There are giant pieces of the gym falling into teachers, there's practical car crashes, we love to see it. The best example of the different effects from the original to the 2013 remake would obviously be the CGI. I'm not gonna talk so much about the 2002 remake because there really is no style to that movie. So anyway, with Margaret White's death scene in the original, they had to have her wear this vest that had these blocks of wood in it and they would slowly pull the knives into them. I'm a little bit fuzzy on exactly how that worked because the way she explained it, I was like, oh, wait, what? The point is it was practical. In the remake, it's like, whoa, they're floating, and they're all pointing at her, that's for sure. Oh, and also they look fake. They look real bad. The same can be said for the prom scene. I feel like it's really painful how the humans flop around in a very unrealistic way. They look like those blow-up noodle men that they try to use to lure people into car dealerships. And the music isn't nearly as good either. The original score is inspired by Bernard Herrmann with a little tune that you might recognize.
Get him, please, and talk to me!
Yes, it was intentionally meant to sound a lot like Psycho. De Palma had worked with Bernard Herrmann before, and if you don't know, he is responsible for some of the most amazing musical scores of all time, including Psycho. But he passed before he was able to do the music for Carrie, and so they decided to pay homage to Bernard Herrmann and Psycho with the score, which obviously created an immaculate mood. Okay, this is gonna be a really long video, so I'm gonna go ahead and segue to our theme portion. Earlier I mentioned how I don't really enjoy that a woman's coming-of-age story is told so obviously through the lens of a man, because some of the subject matter is really deep, but they cover it in a very superficial way. Like, let's maybe talk about why periods are so stigmatized even between other women, and why women often feel so competitive and isolated from one another at such a young age. Hint, the answer is the patriarchy, but is that explored here? Minimally. Carrie's principal doesn't really seem to care to understand her situation very deeply. And then there's John Travolta's character who plays the abusive boyfriend, and that's what's driving Chris, kind of. But concerning our main character of Carrie, the movie is basically just like an anti-bullying PSA. The most interesting themes are unfortunately explored through the side characters. They might also be hinting to the fact that physical punishment doesn't really help people learn from their mistakes. Case in point is the character of Chris, who just gets even angrier and more spiteful. And I've had this same thought every single time that a volleyball coach would make me do like 10 dives or something if I missed a dig. I'd just be like, okay, first of all, I hate you. And second of all, now I'm bruised, so how do you expect me to play volleyball better now? See, I'm still holding on to my repressed anger from the physical punishment. Shout out to the boomer parents that are like, well, back in the day, my mother would smack my bare bottom with a wooden spoon. And it's like, okay, so maybe unpack that? One theme that I feel like the movie did handle really well is how religion can be very isolating for people that fall prey to super extreme belief systems. It's clearly best exemplified through Margaret White that if you're not socialized and exposed to other people people that exist outside of your very narrow worldview, then one day you might, you know, try to kill your daughter. In the first remake, I don't feel like they were trying to do anything profound at all. The story is just fully regurgitated with a bunch of extra scenes to fill out the runtime, and it was also made with the purpose just to kick off a new TV show, which failed, so really need I say more. Let's discuss the themes of the 2013 remake. I feel like some of the themes were realized a bit better in this movie, but at other times they were even more sloppy, so let's unpack that. I feel like you can definitely sense more of a woman's touch on this story, because a lot of the characters' motivations make way more sense. You see that a bully has a very wealthy father who is used to bailing her out.
You can't prove she did anything, can you?
It gives reason to her entitlement and her extremism because she's not somebody that's used to dealing with the consequences of her actions. There's also an added element of technology which exacerbates the wrongs that are done to Carrie. While technology is a wonderful thing, it does also exploit the worst parts of ourselves, so I'm really glad that they did modernize it with that touch. Also because the level of torment against Carrie was so much higher, her level of destruction was a lot higher, which made sense even if it kind of was overkill. There are also moments in this movie where Carrie retaliates what her mother is saying about the Bible and her beliefs, and she says no, like that's not what it says in the Bible, God loves us, etc. So we get to see more how Carrie views religion, which is interesting because it shows that there is more of a gray area when it comes to spirituality.
Hi, so another thing that I forgot to mention, and one reason why I feel you can definitely tell there's like a woman's touch on this film, is you see things much more directly from the point of view of Carrie, because from the very opening scene where we meet Carrie in the pool, she's watching Sue and Tommy as they're like kissing and stuff, and we're seeing it through Carrie's point of view. And what that tells us is that like Carrie is starting to be interested in boys. She's starting to be interested in her sexuality, and she's like, oh, huh. They're kissing. Would you look at that? I don't think there was really anything like that in the other two Carrie movies, and I feel like it's really important because her sexuality awakening is kind of an important contributing factor here to her wanting to fit in. Anyway, that's all I have to say. Bye.
However, where it does start to get sloppy is that they show Margaret's views from a much more exploitative angle. When she's talking to another mom in her shop, she engages in self-harm, which I'm not even gonna show a blurred version of that scene. Yes, she's clearly mentally unwell, but I cannot understand her motivations in that scene. It feels like it's just done for shock value. So the remake wins some and it loses some, but because I feel like Chloe Grace Moretz was just way too hard to follow as Carrie, it mostly loses some. And on that note, it's time for our overall comparison. To be honest, I'm just not super big on Carrie in general. I gave the remake the highest score on Letterboxd at a whopping 2 stars, which in retrospect, that's sinful. I'm sorry, my bad. After doing all my research, watching the documentaries and stuff like that, I have a much deeper appreciation for the original Carrie. I still don't think that I like it as a movie though. I just don't really enjoy watching a girl be tortured by all of her peers and her mother. It's just a tough watch. And I get kind of bored when I watch it, and it's interesting because I want to see if this is going to be a pattern. In the behind the scenes, Brian De Palma himself and quite a few other creative heads on that project were very boring people. The most interesting people from the original were definitely the actors. I feel like I got a lot of insight from Sissy Spacek. And you know, another movie that I really don't like is Rob Zombie's Halloween, and the exact same thing happened. In Rob Zombie's Halloween, the behind the scenes gave me the same impression. It was just very boring. And will that be a pattern? We shall find out, maybe. The pattern being that people that I find boring make boring movies to me. And then I'm gonna blow past the 2002 remake. I just don't think it's important here. You already know that I think it's so bad. And then watching the behind the scenes for the 2013 remake didn't really do it any favors. I was like, oh, you use CGI in that scene? Cool, tell me something I don't know. So I think that in terms of entertainment value, the 2013 remake would be the winner, but I feel like the original is probably a stronger film. So maybe it's a tie today? I don't know, you tell me. I mean, I know a lot of people are gonna prefer the original, so go on, yell at me in your little comment section. I deserve it. I'm doing a bad job at being decisive today. But I'll be very interested to see how I feel about these movies upon a rewatch. I think that I'll like the original a lot more knowing what I know now and having more of an appreciation for it. The 2013 remake, I don't know. I feel like that's one that I'll probably like less and less upon each rewatch. And then the 2002 remake, you already know, you wouldn't catch me touching that movie with a 10-foot pole. So that brings us to the close of this very long video. As always, I want to thank my lovely patrons. Today you get your kisses, as always. If you want to get my kisses too, then definitely sign up for my Patreon down below. You get early access and sometimes you get some exclusive content, very fun stuff. I hope that you enjoy your day or night wherever you are. Drink some water, maybe take a bath, relax, treat yourself, enjoy yourself. yourself today. And I hope that you subscribe and click the notification bell so you don't miss my next one, and that's it. Bye!